From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is AgDay.
Sour grapes.
All of our contracts were canceled on December 31st, 2023.
All of them.
All of them with the exception of one.
The reality some family farms are facing in California wine country. Another hurricane threatens in the Caribbean. The latest on where Hurricane Ernesto is heading next, as USDA calls for big things from this year's corn and soybean crops.
Is there anything that could stand in the way of these bumper Midwestern crops?
Could weather threats stand in the way? The latest right now on AgDay.
AgDay is brought to you by Pioneer. Pioneer brand corn has the home field advantage with rigorous local testing to give you a winning season. Pioneer brand corn, your best year starts here.
Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. USDA is calling for big corn and soybean crops this year, but how likely is that to happen? Well, right now, only 5% of the nation's corn crop is in drought, and you can see that doesn't include key growing areas in the Midwest. Last year at this time, 49% of the corn crop was in drought. As for soybeans, it's the same, 5% now in drought, but last year it stood at more than 43%. USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says right now he sees very few weather-related concerns.
Number one, there's really no sign of any widespread severe thunderstorms anytime soon. And with each passing day, that gets crops closer to maturity. Furthermore, we continue to see the absolute absence of extreme heat.
And Rippey says there seems to be plenty of moisture in key growing areas with more rain this week. And we'll get our own look at the crop next week as the annual Pro Farmer Crop Tour kicks off Monday. We'll be heading into the fields of Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, Ohio, and South Dakota to see just how big the corn and soybean crops could be. Each night, crews in the East and West will meet to talk about the day's samples as tour leads Brian Grady of Pro Farmer and Chip Flory of AgriTalk share the day's current yield estimates for each state. And we will bring you those numbers each night as part of Crop Tour Live on Farm Journal's social media channels and on agweb.com. And while many Midwest farmers may see a bumper crop, lower prices for corn and soybeans may mean that significant crop revenue insurance payments are unlikely this year. Now that's the opinion of ag economists at FarmDoc at the University of Illinois. They looked into the ag risk coverage and price loss coverage programs. The economists say farmers in Illinois should not expect commodity title payments for 2023 production, which would happen this coming October. They say there is greater potential for payments associated with this year's production. They say wheat's 2023 marketing year average is $6.96 a bushel. That's well above the $5.50 trigger. And counties in Illinois would need yields below 68% of the benchmark to trigger ARCO payments for 2023, which no counties in the state have done. Corn's price is currently projected at $4.65 a bushel, well above the $3.70 reference price, and the current projection for soybeans is $12.50 a bushel, also well above the $8.40 reference price. Now, the economists say current USDA projections suggest an even lower 2024 marketing year average for corn, soybeans, and wheat, which are all well above this year's effective reference prices, meaning even lower prices would be needed to trigger PLC payments. Happening right now, Hurricane Ernesto is gaining strength in the Caribbean, bringing heavy rainfall, gusty winds, and storm surge primarily to Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Laura Geary has the latest on where the storm is headed next.
Ernesto is now a Category 1 hurricane and gaining strength as it barrels through the Caribbean. The storm landed a powerful punch on the U.S. Virgin Islands Tuesday as a tropical storm. Its wide-reaching bands have been lashing Puerto Rico over the past several hours. As the center of the storm passed the U.S. territory about 175 miles to the northwest. Nearly a half a foot of rain has fallen so far across Puerto Rico, and meteorologists warn the storm surge could reach 3 feet with life-threatening swells and riptides. Multiple flash flood warnings were in effect throughout the day across Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Puerto Rico's governor mobilized the National Guard ahead of the storm, and crews worked to clear drainage canals, while some schools were converted into shelters. Many residents prepared by stocking up on food and water and topping off gas tanks. A good thing, since hundreds of thousands of homes and businesses are now without power across the islands. Much of Puerto Rico still grapples with an outdated electrical grid, and some areas are still under repair from Hurricane Maria's crippling blow in 2017. Ernesto will curve away from the Caribbean into Atlantic waters in the hours ahead, where it's expected to grow even stronger over open sea. It could reach Category 3 status before passing by Bermuda this weekend. I'm Laura Aguirre reporting for AgDay.
Not Ernesto, but the Midwest is in for some timely rains. Meteorologist Matt Engelbrecht has an update for us.
Yeah, we got some rain moving through parts of the Midwest. This is a combination of a ridge of high pressure down here to the south and then some weak troughing in parts of the Midwest. So that's going to expand the rain showers in and across parts of Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, moving through Ohio and eventually into the Northeast as you get on the other side of the weekend. So for our Thursday and Friday, more of kind of a soaking garden variety type shower. Now back into the Dakotas, Minnesota, but also down here to the south where we have this matchup between the high, this ridge into Texas and Oklahoma, and this low. We're going to kind of squeeze the chance of some isolated thunderstorms. If there is going to be any severe weather potential, it's going to be between those two features, the trough and the ridge. That's why I see more of the yellow into parts of St. Louis. Now, as we go into the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, with that upper level low just kind of sitting over parts of the Midwest, will stay cloudy and rainy. Not necessarily expecting heavy downpours like what we're seeing, tropical downpours near Bermuda with that tropical system, but certainly enough to keep everything kind of wet, damp, and cool. And wheat harvest also rolling in Canada. Jake in Manitoba says it's not every year that he starts harvest on his birthday, but this year he said it was go time. Oh yeah, happy birthday, Jake. I'll have more in your forecast coming up.
Corn and soybeans fighting to claw back Monday's losses. Wheat, that's a different story. We'll talk about wheat markets coming up next. And later, falling demand, weak prices, farm financial stress. We aren't talking about grain growers. Instead, a look at the issues facing California grape growers today in the country. Could the Federal Reserve be poised to lower interest rates? A new measure of inflation is continuing to show hopeful signs. The Consumer Price Index shows that year-over-year inflation reached its lowest level in more than 3 years last month, slowing below 3%. Now, the report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics showing prices rose just 2.9% for the 12 months ending in July. On a monthly basis, prices rose 0.2%. With inflation starting to appear to be under control, economists hope the Fed will reduce borrowing costs to try to get job growth booming again. Grains fought hard to stay in the green midweek, with even soybeans staying positive. AgDay's Michelle Rook has more on the winter and spring wheat crops in markets now.
Joining us with markets, Randy Martinson, Martinson Ag. And Randy, let's talk a little bit more about wheat after the WASDE report and some of the changes that we saw there, including lower acres. And a lot of that coming from spring wheat, right?
It was, which was kind of a surprise to the marketplace, especially after seeing the last couple of reports, the wheat quality tour finding a good crop, and also from USDA's report last month. So we did see a pretty good size cut in planted and harvested acres, the biggest part of it coming in the spring wheat side. We saw planted acres drop by 565,000, harvested were down by 555,000. Most of that coming in North Dakota and Minnesota. North Dakota acres down 200,000, both harvested and planted. Minnesota's was down 330,000 on their planted, 320 on harvested. So kind of what we were thinking this spring, and that is that we were a little too wet to see that many wheat acres get planted.
And as a result, we ended up with a lower spring wheat crop, right? And some thought it was going to go up.
Well, right. Everybody expected the production was going to increase because of the big yields that we've been hearing and then expecting. Yield did drop by 0.4 of a bushel too. So, I mean, you added all that together and you dropped the spring wheat production by, a pretty good number. And that was surprising to the marketplace, and which brought wheat production down for this month and made it a friendly report.
We also lost some winter wheat acres too. And so production overall was down, right?
It was. And winter wheat acres mainly out of Texas, where they cut their planted by 300,000 and they're harvested by 200,000. So yeah, we did see a cut there. That was the biggest share as far as the winter wheat is concerned. But it was, like you said, a surprise winter wheat production coming in at 1.36 billion. That was 16 less than expected, 20 less than the previous month. And spring wheat, was that 544 million bushels. That was down 35 from expectations. So yeah, it was a friendly report.
Right, and ending stocks were lowered about 28 million bushels, but still, Randy, we're above 800 million bushels, like 828. So that's still above where we were last year, right? So what does that mean for price?
That means that price doesn't have to really go up a lot, and then the big missing, the missing link out of wheat continues to be demand.
Thanks for joining us, Randy Martinson. Ag will have more AgDay coming up. Watch Markets Now with Michelle Rook on the Farm Journal YouTube channel, keeping you updated throughout the day on the markets at the open, midday, and close. Find out what moved the markets today and what to expect the market to do next.
Well, being Thursday, I want to take an extended look at what's going on with the jet stream this weekend and especially next week. The feature that we've been talking about going back to last week is this ridge of high pressure. What has changed this week and also going into the weekend is how strong or weak this trough is. Now, we're expecting a cutoff low to set up, and that is going to cause, as we just looked at, cloud cover, damp conditions, wet conditions to stick around parts of the Midwest for an extended period of time. So this is on Friday. You see that circle right there. That is that cutoff low. The ridge and also this high amplitude ridge is really what's going to get the heat going in through the Dakotas. I'm going to take you all the way into next Wednesday. You can kind of see how that trough ejects up to the northeast, and in its wake, a deeper trough sets up across the United States. A very important pattern in that if this ridge is a little bit stronger and can push more to the east, we'd be looking at that heat extending, the heat and the dry air extending more to the east as well. Right now, as it stands, the strength of this ridge and where it is located means that we'll have slightly cooler temperatures and cloudy conditions in and around the East Coast. Now, in between the two, that trough and that ridge, we're looking at the possibility of a few showers kicking up in between the two. But this is not a pattern where we're expecting widespread severe weather or even any kind of tropical disturbances to impact parts of the United States. Again, this is next Wednesday, so I'm taking you way out into the future. As we get into next weekend, here's another storm system trying to pull off the Pacific and into the Northwest. Depending on where that goes, we could be looking at a similar pattern setting up in the 5 to 7 day period, which would be next week, the 14-day period. Speaking of which, 19th through the 23rd, still expecting the precipitation outlook to kind of be ridge dominated with dry air, or at least below normal conditions in and across the Midwest, but also into Texas and Oklahoma. Tinley Park, Illinois, rain and some thunder, high around 78 degrees, low of 68. New York, mostly sunny, high of 86, low of 64. Worland, Wyoming, sunny, high of 84.
USDA is continuing to take steps to prevent avian flu from making it into the food supply. The latest, a one-year testing program to assess the presence of the virus in beef from culled dairy cows. The agency says testing will involve collecting approximately 800 samples nationwide from milk cows sent to slaughter starting later next month. Officials say the aim is to determine if the H5N1 virus is present in asymptomatic cows and to trace any detection infections back to their source. USDA has already conducted tests on beef tissue from culled dairy cows at select facilities, finding no viral particles in all but one sample. Now, at last report, there were 190 herds confirmed to have the virus in 13 states. The latest cases reported more than a week ago in Colorado. Florida's law banning the sale of lab-grown meat is now facing a lawsuit. The Institute for Justice suing the state, saying the law is unconstitutional, claiming it favors local meat producers by restricting out-of-state competition. The law, the first of its kind in the nation, was signed by Republican Florida Governor Ron DeSantis earlier this year. DeSantis expressing concerns that cultivated meat posed a threat to traditional agriculture. An attorney with a law firm that filed the suit says the law is not about safety, but about stifling innovation and limiting consumer choice. The law went into effect on July 1st. It was another record breaker for this year's 42nd annual Iowa Governor's Charity Steers Show. The Iowa Cattlemen's Association says the show raised $568,000 for the Ronald McDonald House charities in the state. Now that's up from last year's record of $501,000. The event taking part at the Iowa State Fair, which has become a tradition. This year's event hosted 24 sponsored steers. Now, among those taking part, showing the steers, AgriTalk's own Chip Flory. Winners in 4 categories were recognized in the show ring, including the Community Hero, Grand Champion Showman, People's Choice, and Judges Grand Champion. Not only was the Pioneer Pavilion at the fair packed to see the show, but more than 4,000 people watched online. Up next, many people enjoy a nice glass of wine with dinner, but increasing competition is pressing some California grape growers into a corner. Details in the country. It's not just farmers in the Midwest dealing with low prices. In California, from nuts to fruits, prices are low and financial stress is weighing heavy on farmers there. For grape growers, declining demand for wine and an increase of imported wine means there's a glut of grapes this year. As Farm Journal's Tyne Morgan tells us, there are now fears it could ultimately force more family farmers out of business.
The 5th generation to farm in her family.
I think it's incredibly rare.
Jennifer Thompson is one of the few family farmers still left in Napa Valley.
When you truly meet a family grower who is hands-on and drives their own tractor and is responsible for selling their own fruit and is responsible for paying the taxes on the land, and there's no middleman involved, that's a rarity in 2024.
Battling different weather each year, she says this year there actually haven't been too many speed bumps in the road. Yet these vines aren't as full as they'd normally be.
I made some key decisions during pruning to reduce the crop load as a benefit or in conjunction with this being a sluggish grape selling market.
In December of last year, Thompson got some gut-wrenching news.
But ultimately, all of our contracts were canceled on December 31st, 2023.
All of them.
All of them with the exception of one.
Thompson's vineyards produce just under 300 tons of grapes each year. And for the first time in more than a decade, 2/3 of it is without a home.
I have found limited and very small homes. And by that, I mean, am I able to sell 2 to 8 tons here or there? Yes. But our parcels produce hundreds of tons worth of grapes.
And about 60 miles east, grape growers in Lodi, California are faced with the same dilemma.
Our community is multi-generational farming families that, their families have been farming grapes for over 100 years. And so their whole identity is wrapped up in growing grapes. And so it's really hitting some of our people hard.
20% of California's total wine production comes from Lodi, home to 100,000 acres of grapes. Executive Director of the Lodi Wine Grape Commission, Stuart Spencer, says the issue is both too much supply and dwindling demand.
We were fortunate in our industry and in the United States to have about 30 years of positive growth, year after year growth. And, you know, one of the challenges with growth is it tends to hide the problems and challenges.
He says the U.S. wine market started to see demand flatten in 2018 as the baby boomer generation grew older.
And then we went into the pandemic, and the pandemic really distorted sales and shipments. And we are still dealing with the hangover of the distortions from the pandemic.
With inflation and other concerns in the economy, consumers are simply drinking less wine as well.
It's pushed, you know, the inventory back upstream, basically, to the wineries, who then turn around and cut grape purchases to the growers.
Reporting for AgDay, I'm Tyne Morgan.
All right, thanks, Tyne. And Tyne will be back tomorrow with more from California's wine country. And that's all the time we have this morning. We're sure glad you tuned in. From all of us here at AgDay, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Have a great day. Have fun.